Welcome everyone to part 4 of the essentials of texturing. I'm gonna do this session offline because we've been having quite a few issues with lives on YouTube, so I hope that's fine. Um, we're going to be proving our textures today with rendering. Rendering is a great way to find how far you can push your textures, sorry. Um, and of course, like getting a portfolio piece and so on. Um, but it is a great way to start your polishing phase. All right, so I have this scene right here with a little bit of few changes, I guess. What I'm doing is pretty much the standard, just applying my texture, sorry, to my materials over here. The usual normal albedo, roughness, metallic occlusion. Um, okay, somebody's saying, "Are you speaking?" Um, am I am I good? Okay. So cool. So I have a few special things that I want to have in this scene that I'll explain very quickly. So the first one is I have a glass material over here, which is what I'm using for the front and the back glass elements of the rangefinder and also the rangefinder patch itself. Um, all I'm doing here is I'm enabling refraction, and I'll be using ray tracing for this. So one thing that might be happening now is that uh, our roughness bias is fine. So most likely our roughness is doing something weird. So I'll just place my roughness at 0.05, 0.05. All right, there we go. And roughness and transparency are always correlated. So when you have a roughness bias of 0, which is the default that you will have, the more rough your object, the least transparent it will be. Okay? So if you want to avoid that, if you want to have a rough object that lets light through or feels very transparent, you should, I guess, either disable or tone down the roughness bias quite a bit. In my case, it's not super important. 0.05 roughness should feel relatively shiny. All right. And so I can leave my roughness bias at 0. Depth and scatter right now don't matter. This should feel like just a transparent piece of glass. You can see I have some internal elements. Those are really simple modeled objects. Um, and I'll explain their purpose. Obviously, this one's very clear. It's just to simulate the internals of this object. When we activate ray tracing, they will be invisible enough that I don't need to detail much. All right. Um, but for this frosted area, if I go ahead and hide it, what I have is a little bit of a trick. So I am using refraction, but I am allowing roughness bias to go up a little bit. You can see this is positive. So maybe, yeah, 363 is fine. And what this is doing is it's creating this sort of frosted effect on the glass. Um, if there's nothing behind it or like some black object, what will happen is it'll look very dark. Behind the piece of glass, what I have is this object that is kind of shaded. I think it's like a square that is shading like a circle. So the normals are altered. I'm not sure why my marmoset is so laggy. It is shading like a circle, like a sphere. And I'm applying a white matte material to it. This white matte is cheating a little bit, and I could have at some point some emission behind this piece just to bring up its clearness. Okay, if I open PRF with my references, you should be able to see what I'm trying to copy. And this isn't maybe the most clear, but there should be a certain frostiness to this window. Okay, this is what's catching the light so that the focus mechanism can be visible to the human eye. I guess if I open, let's see, if I open this one, it will become a little bit more apparent that most of the time these look quite bright. Okay, like it's the example over here, which is just maybe a little bit too pixelated. Um, and then I have another little material here, which is the plug material that I am using refraction. In this case, I want roughness bias at maximum, and I'm also masking just so that there is a small blend between a transparent material and a non-transparent material. By making this like semi-transparent, I can achieve this sort of effect. If I go ahead and fully make it transparent, you can see it looks maybe a little bit strange. Light is bouncing a little bit too much towards the inside. But if I mask it at like 0.3 or maybe 0.5, I can get the best of both worlds. I'm using depth and scatter to create this sort of greenish effect, um, kind of replicating a glow in the dark type of material. Okay. And then, of course, I will be using ray tracing because the difference between non-ray tracing and ray tracing when it comes to glass is night and day. And it is very important that I get my glasses or translucent and transparent surfaces to be as realistic as possible. Now, I forgot to mention one little thing. The glass is using Newton rings on the clear coat reflection. This effect will pretty much color your specular so that you can create the effect of some sort of like coated glass is the name of this. And for now, we can leave it purple, but we can be playing with the thickness to kind of change the color and so on. We can go even super far and make it rainbow-like. Okay, let's give this a strength of 0.5. Maybe 0.75. Okay. So for now, that should be quite explanatory of what this scene is. These matte materials, they're what's behind the pieces. So on the white mat, as I explained before, we're doing the frosted glass, and on the black mat, this should be we should be having the rangefinder area. Okay. Right now it's just using the default material from what I can see. So let's fix this. Drag and drop over here. And we should be having darker and maybe even too dark materials. So maybe we should play with this once everything is lit. Okay, I don't want to have such a dark patch and so on. Okay, so first things first, composition. We should understand composition. The first render that I will make is my thumbnail, because I feel like on a square object or a square image, it's quite easy to kind of get anything or everything that you need. So in this case, I think I'm going to go for some sort of diagonal composition. We could do many things. We could have like a lot of negative space at the top or maybe at the bottom, or maybe play with some sort of like horizon line that's maybe below or behind our shape. Let's bring this to front to bring forward. All right. Anyways, we could have like some horizon and our object at the maybe at the bottom or the center and play with that. We could be playing with two, front and back, but I think one big object like playing with the diagonal composition might be the best way forward. So in order to get a square composition, I'm going to go into my render tab and I'm going to change my output, okay, so that when I activate my safe plane, I'll make sure this full opacity. my aspect ratio changes also. So right now we have that square image. Um, yeah. All right. So I have this object with a bad pivot. So I'll make sure that I'm using the one with the right pivot. Okay. And as you can see right now, this is a little boring. Well, obviously super default. But by playing with maybe the rotation of our object to go diagonally and maybe rotating our camera around, we could get something that looks a little bit more interesting and that we can have our lights play with a little more than this. So let's go for something like this. Now, my cameras aren't set up right now. Nothing's set up right now. Um, I think one of the most important things is to use the same tone mapping that you've used in Marmoset. Okay, so I've been using aces in Marmoset, so I'll switch to that. And it makes things super, super dark. So Hail um, makes is like aces, at least for something so black and white as this. Hail could be a great way to mimic aces, but with a softer touch. If I really needed to validate my colors also, I would go ahead and take a screenshot of both programs under similar lighting conditions. You can easily take your sky to be something like Studio Tomoko. So if I go into image and you navigate all the way through your program files, Autodesk, not Autodesk, sorry, Adobe, like designer, you could go into resources, view 3D maps, and you could get Tomoko Studio, and you would get a very similar lighting compared to what you have in Substance if you're using, or you could get your Substance maps, whatever, whichever one is your favorite. This is from Designer, but they should be the same as in Painter. So if I really needed to prove the colors of my textures, I would do that here. But it's also good to understand that maybe your textures will not be always showcasing in the same lighting conditions. So if a texture works with a little bit of variation, I would say it's not a bad thing. Okay, there's always going to be differences. A lot of my students ask me, why doesn't this look the same in Unreal as it does in Marmoset, sorry, in Substance or in Marmoset? And of course, like every program has a slightly different way of rendering things. And you should always ensure that your texture looks the best in the final program, which is Unreal or Marmoset if you're doing a portfolio piece. But if I'm working on a game, my responsibility is not that the object looks good in Substance. My responsibility is that the object looks good in Engine. Okay? So don't get frustrated. Test, prove, and fix. That's the polishing phase of a texture or part of it. All right, I'm going to triple check that my audio is coming through. Cool. So I find this composition to be quite nice, but maybe my field of view is a little boring. I think I can make this a ton more interesting. If I go 75 millimeters on my lens, now I am quite like I'm flattening my perspective quite a bit. So if I go back to 28, you can see like it's difficult to see what's inside of this area. Um, and we have a little bit of distortion on this. Like if that's what you want, then you should go for it. Um, but if we do the 75 millimeters, then we get a much flatter and a lot more of a straight line, diagonal straight line. So let's find the interesting shot here. I think I will start with what I had, something like this. Some sort of diagonal shot of my camera, kind of going through, maybe it's rotated a little bit too much. But I feel like that is definitely interesting. I'm looking at two triangles here, the bottom triangle and the top triangle, and as long as those two those two are similar, um, we are good. All right, then it's time to turn off the lights. And this is how I start my renders. So I'm going to go for color on my ambient sky. You can also do maybe ambient sky and pull the brightness down quite a bit. Okay. And it's time again to turn off the lights. So I'm going to go ahead and pull the brightness down quite a lot. And I'm not sure if you're seeing this already, okay? But like there is already potential here. I know we have a very dark image. But if I go ahead and like click on my sky up here, I will create a skylight. The problem that I have now is that it's kind of difficult to move around through the cameras. So I'm just gonna split my viewport. Now I should have two. I'm going to click on any area and I'm going to hit Control L. Control L should create a light from the camera. I'm gonna go into this main camera and I'm going to switch the light to light 1. And I'm just going to look at what part I want to light with this camera. So I could do maybe something like this, some sort of gradient top to down. All right, let's keep this file quite organized. So I'm going to group. I'm not going to group my sky because I found that this sometimes crashes Marmoset. Um, lights, and I'll do top. I'm not sure why. Let's see top. All right, I'll save. And then we can play with the brightness a little bit. So I'll play with brightness. I'll play with the angle of the spot. And maybe with the direction a little bit. Now, let's pay very close attention here. I have very sharp shadows. If I pull up the diameter of the light, these shadows should be smoothing quite a bit. And that's going to give a little bit of extra realism. It's time now to activate our ray tracing. So I'll do Control R. Okay, not a huge change so far, but something nice is going on. And I'm going to blow up this light quite a bit. So something like that seems interesting. Let's play a little bit. Let's see what happens if I only hit the top surface of the light, maybe a little bit more from the back. Okay. And it's going to be important to start to recomposite the render. Like if I want that to be my thumbnail, like the composition would need to change, or maybe not, but certainly slightly. And I'm going to start to find again like maybe a nice point where I'm kind of lighting all of these areas very slightly. Like for example, I'm looking at the rim here of the lens. So it's looking nice and effective. So I can zoom in a little closer because maybe I don't want to light the bottom part, this corner here. So I can zoom in a little closer. Okay, and I can start playing with the sharpness of this spotlight. Like this number caps at 1, but I can write manually like 0.1, for example. So I can do that, maybe increase the angle. Okay, and increase the brightness. Let's reduce angle. And I should be capable now of getting softer transitions from there. Although if you play too much with brightness and sharpness, it kind of caps like, and you can only do so much with it. So let's keep playing with the position here. Maybe I think we have a nice gradient going on right there. And now it's time to probably light the front. That's what you would think, right? It's time to like bring some light to the front over here. And sure, we can just hit Control L and bring a little bit of brightness to that, but I'm not going to go for that. I'm going to go directly into adding rim lights. I was going to say rimming, but like I know Slaven was going to probably start laughing and so on. But I'm going to start adding rim lights to my objects. So I want to make sure that my rim light is coming through the back. And I'm going to start lighting maybe this little area over there, like so. So as you can see now, we are bringing a little bit of a silhouette right there. And I think now it's time to recompose our render because we have a lot of weight up here. So let's start quickly reframing a little, like a little bit of it is fine. Okay. So a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Okay, really cool and effective way to bring a little bit of interest to some areas. So if I start to add rim light here, this is a really powerful way to kind of like bring an object out of the darkness that we have created from the sky. Of course, like at some point that brightness could come up and start to light a little bit more of the features that we have. But for an object like this, I think we want to create some dramatism. Why? Because effectively we have a box, and a very boring box if we're not careful enough. And so in here, I'm already starting to realize a few things. The first one, some of the details that I might want to be or to make obvious are not coming through. So I was already prepared for this. I talked about this on the previous episode. Our scratches, they didn't show through with lightings with strong lights, and most of the time for an object like this we're going to want strong lights. So I had already exaggerated some of this damage, which now isn't so evident as it was on substance, is it? So it's important to figure those things out when we're looking at renders. And again, I'm looking at this one and I'm thinking, this appears very clean. For example, this part here, the lever and so on. So it's time now to go back into Substance Painter and maybe rebalance some of those textures. We want our textures to be dynamic, not just reacting to one lighting scenario, but to many. Um, that's why also, like, I mean, renders are going to oh man, the wind is incredibly heavy now. I have this heavy whistling outside of the windows. Can you hear that? Maybe you can hear that. I'm not sure if it's coming through the microphone, but it's quite distracting. The textures are exported in metal roughness. That's correct. That's correct. And we can play with that. Like if I'm using microsurface, for example, I could play with the exponent here and use advanced microsurface and play with the exponent and maybe do minimum, maximum, and bring a little bit of contrast to those. If I ever want to, like, I don't know, for example, now this becomes like all this dirt becomes a lot more apparent than it was before. I'm going to make sure I don't do that just yet. As I was saying, you want your textures to react properly to as many lighting scenarios as possible. And this is just one of them for now. So let's keep going. I'm going to tone down the emissive on the white matte because I want it to show through, but not so much. And I'm thinking we don't have much going on the bottom rim, so I'm going to duplicate this. And I'm going to go into my light rim one and maybe bring this light from the bottom of the object. So maybe a little light. I would probably aim to continue the rim light on this side here. Let's see. Let's play maybe with the angle now. There we go, something like this. So continue with the rim light over here, but softly start losing it. And I'm starting to have a cool render here, maybe a little bit of like product, but it's looking quite cool. Now, one of the things that is happening also is that our reflections absolutely suck now. Like I have this, for example, this very shiny object, which is totally black. Same for the glass, same for many parts right now. One of the things that you can do is you can go into your window, library, objects, and you should be able to find a plane, or if not, a cube will work. So I'll use that plane and I'll apply maybe the default material to this since I'm not using it for anything. Oh, I moved my camera, mistake. Okay, and I think it's now time to create a new camera, maybe just a camera for like moving things around. So let's go over here and let's use a little bit of a photography trick. So this is going to be a reflector. A reflector is pretty much like something like a piece of cardboard that is used to create reflections or to block reflections away from an object. So as you can see here, if I go ahead and like not cast shadows, I think if I don't cast shadows, it's also not going to be casting, it's not going to be creating any sort of reflection. So I need to be very careful to place this in a way that doesn't block my lights. Okay. So this is difficult to do, but it will be a nice way, again, a cheap way to create reflections without creating. Well, why can't I see it? That's quite strange. Okay, I'll get out of ray tracing for a second. It might be because it's not lit. So let me go ahead and bring in a little bit of emission just temporarily. Let's make the glow white. Oh, silly me. I set it as invisible to camera. Anyways, if we find the right angle, we should be able to bring in. Is this invisible in reflections though? Okay, now it's facing up, should be facing down. And it is not. Let's see, it's not doing much now. Obviously, if we want this to reflect, we should find the tangent, the diagonal. I should be seeing something by now. So I'm gonna do a variation of this. I'm gonna do this with, let's do rim bottom, and I'm going to create a variation with from variation of this. So this is just going to be another one of these lights. I'll call it reflector, and I'm going to make it a rectangle. So one cool thing about Marmoset is you can use this light placer, and I can do it so that this light hits that area right there. And if I play with the brightness maybe, and maybe with making a larger rectangle, there we go. Like that should not be bringing a ton of light. I can also like make it a very small angle. So it should not be bringing a lot of light, but just bringing a tiny bit of that reflection. We can of course play with temperature with that to create some cool effects. But for now, I'll just do this and create some nice reflection on this part of the object. So playing with the width and the height of the rectangle. Just that. Okay. That should be effective at creating this. Of course, we're out of ray tracing. We should always be in ray tracing because as you can see, things change and they change quite a bit. I'm going to guess that's a brightness thing. It's not. It's probably. Oh, hold on. Careful with the plane. All right, let's make it large. It is really strange that it's not showing. Like that should of course be showing. So yeah, this feels so much like it's some sort of bug. There we go. Yeah, that's buggy. Look at that. If I decrease the angle further from some value, it'll just stop working. I love it. I love it when programs do what you want them to do. Anyways, that should be fixing enough and not reacting with everything else enough as well. So we are detailing this part a tiny bit. So I can do the same thing. So we can do reflector for example, the shutter. And I can also create a reflector. Let me duplicate this. We can create reflectors for example, these windows just a tiny bit. So that looks really cool already. And then we can create another one for this other window right there. Maybe this one, we just make it a lot more subtle. So now I think it's time to play with the Newton rings. If we play with the film thickness, we can change the color. So something maybe a little bit more purple could work, something like this. And this is going to be my reflector for the big window. And this is my RF patch. Okay. And I can play with the brightness of these to make sure that the reflection feels nice enough. And let's make sure that, all right, there's something wrong with my mouse. What the hell is wrong today? Too much going on. I can play with temperature if it creates too much of a different color. So I can make it blue. I can play with the color also. But yeah, my intention is just to have a little something going on in there. Okay. So that's looking like it's looking nice, but it's like not showcasing our object a lot, really. Maybe playing a little bit more with brightness and balancing out could work. I like to do this with curves. So a little bit of an S curve, maybe boosting the highlights and bringing the shadows back to their original position, just to not brighten the image, but just to brighten maybe the highlights. That can do a lot. That's more of a post-process thing. Obviously, like I can get effects in there if I want to. Like for example, there I'm bringing a lot of contrast to some areas, which might not be what I want or might be what I want at some point. Okay. So let's leave saturation and so on. I'm going to bring in a little bit of sharpness here. Something like this. I'm also going to bring in a little bit of bloom just to bring some more brightness to the overall picture. I'm going to make the size either really large so that it creates more of like a light, or I can make it very small. Both effect feel definitely nice. Vignetting is great because it can also reinforce your composition a little bit. So let's make the vignette white. I don't think a white vignette will work. But if we make it red, you can see it's affecting also some areas of the lighting, which might not be what I want. So I'll leave the vignette alone. And I love adding grain. I love doing animated grain because it kind of brings the shadows up. Obviously, this is a huge amount of grain, but it makes things feel alive. So I'm going to do 0.05, something like this. And for something like a thumbnail, this could be a good render. Maybe I can bring the lights in a tiny bit more just for you to see some other areas, or I can just bring them down and embrace the darkness of this render. Or I could also do it in a clever way. So if I control D, for example, this light, and we can do something like a fill, I can maybe face or aim like in maybe this direction. Okay, and let's bring the brightness up just slightly. And this way, what I'm creating is I'm creating lights that follow the directionality of the object. So there is a difference between this and this. This will flatten your image. This will kind of allow you to control which areas you want to like remain, um, you want to keep in the dark. You can play with both things. Maybe not so much darkness or 100% darkness, but it's tempting to kill the contrast. I would say don't. I feel like I'm missing a rim light. I would probably love to have some sort of something going on that end. So I'm going to duplicate and I'm going to do a rim for a lever. I'm not sure what's going on, man. I think Marmoset is killing my computer today. And it's probably the reason why I couldn't stream on YouTube. That's very strange though. So let's go into the lights, let's go into the rim lever, and let's try to just aim this at the lever area. It is quite dangerous to do this because we are removing a lot of contrast or the gradient essentially from our original render. Let's bring brightness up. Yeah, it's going to be quite tough to just light the back of the lever. Of course, I could get quite close and just use the spot to just light this part. Maybe from this direction. But I don't think that's adding much. It's kind of changing also the composition. It wasn't too bad though. Let's just have it at like 50%. Cool. Now it could be time to play. What do I mean? For example, we can play with the bottom rim lights and maybe play with temperature a little bit. So we could be playing with here and here and have like similar temperatures or some transition maybe from semi sort of warm. Maybe I can do cold, but like maybe semi warm to warm or to plain red. Like that could be a good way when you're doing a miniature. Like I'm looking at both right now, both the big one and the small one. Like that's gonna, like if you're doing a portfolio shot right now, this is what's gonna be on like your ArtStation page. And if we go into like no temperature, maybe like a thumbnail could feel a little bit boring if we don't have like any color on it. Of course, we could use like a million ways. Like there's a million ways to add color. Like we can do a different color on the, like something like that. Now we have red. And if we go onto the bottom of the rim and do some other red, something like that. Now it feels like, we have a kind of a color palette. We can also do this for the fill light. Bring some temperature in and maybe make it colder. Maybe we can play with other tones, such as maybe yellowish green. Maybe that's too much. Or maybe it just doesn't work. And one of the things that I do with rendering is this sort of method of like fail fast. Fail fast means like you try a million things, but if that something doesn't work, just move on, you know? So kind of like very loose strokes when you're trying to sketch something on um you're sketching something on a canvas. So the rangefinder patch now is probably a little bit too orange. But I feel like at this point I'm already like running in circles. So similarly again to when we're sketching. Oh, hold on. Is my roughness a little too high? Or is my diameter a little too big here on the on the big window? I think my diameter might be a little too big. So it might be creating too much of a blur because this should be like a full shiny material and it's not feeling like that. It should feel very, very shiny and it's not feeling like this currently. Okay, that feels better. Feels a little bit like a manga, like this sort of anime type of light, which is something that could be exploited if we ever want to like duplicate this and create maybe like the typical double stroke that you see in like comics. Like you could do that like this, and it could look very nice. Looks a little bit stylized, but who says like we can't mix? I don't know. That's fun, definitely. So let's also create this similar effect over here. And Christian, I know you asked the question. I feel like it's a little bit I feel like it's a little bit off topic now, unfortunately. So maybe at some other point we could we could tackle those. I will make sure to do how do you call them? I'll do more like art therapy stuff in which we play with not play, but we do questions like those. Okay. I'm not sure about this one. I feel like maybe just doing yeah, it's a little too weird. Where did this one go? Did I misclick at some point and removed it? I might have. Anyways, so that could be a way to render this object. Um, when it comes to my process, this is going to be on YouTube. That's correct, Road. So when it comes to my process, this is pretty much it. I am trying to find the right composition for the right um, aspect ratio. And then I'm trying to light to create dramatic effects. I I try to never create overlighting and I try to embrace shadows if I need to. Like for example, here, I think the object is visible and the details are perceivable. It is very tempting to go in now and say, okay, this is too dark. I'm not showing this thing or that thing. Like it is showing your object. It is showing it is mostly showing the details. But what it is more than anything, it's creating an eye-catching piece. We could argue it's more or less effective, but it is. And this could be again one of the variations of the render. So let's just go ahead and render maybe. Let's go ahead and just render this somehow, like maybe viewport. Let me just check my settings very quickly, make sure that, well, I mean, we could do a few things. We could do focus, we could do like post effect based depth of field. Like if you middle click somewhere, you're gonna get that area in focus. I would do something maybe like an F16, um, and just maybe leave some of these back areas to blur a little bit. And then of course, your your object will look nice if there is some sort of shape reinforcing your silhouette. So if we do like a white backdrop similar to this, or like let's just do full white backdrop, like the perception is different. Okay, so if we do full black backdrop, it kind of changes the style. But I am not against doing a little bit of like a gradient going on, and we can play with this rotating some sky, like maybe getting the light to come from this area over here and playing with the blur a little bit, maybe more blur, maybe less blur, but definitely reinforcing the areas where our light is coming from. Maybe I would be missing a little bit of a warmer backdrop right there, or a gradient right there. We can do that in Photoshop. It doesn't have to happen. Not everything has to happen in this software. I watched this video the other day, and the guy was saying, like, it was a substance designer video, and the guys was saying, like, nowadays we're maybe a little bit too um we're a little bit too stuck on trying to just solve every problem with one tool. And he was specifically talking about um creating rock materials with substance designer. Sometimes you will create problems just by using designer. If you could simulate the way the rocks fall and then use the height map to build your material, then you would get better results. And in a way that applies to everything, right? We don't have to do 100% of the post process in Marmoset. It is a lot better, or a lot more convenient sometimes, to get most of your information from the scene, because of course it's more editable. So if I want to have like more light here or less, like it's nicer to edit, or easier to edit um, in the program. But that, not everything has to happen here. So the sky could be one of those examples in which we can just get or create a custom gradient for this somewhere like Affinity. So in order to do that, like, you would need to go into your render and enable transparency. And because I'm not streaming, only to Discord, by the way, most likely for the next month, I'm going to have issues streaming to YouTube. So if you want to join the sessions, the Discord server that is in the description is the way. Um, but anyways, like, I should be able to use two programs now on this laptop. So I'm going to render viewport to clipboard. I should get transparency. So right now, to be honest, my sky isn't super important. So I will render two versions. I will create, I believe I'm doing 1090, so sorry, 1920 by 1920. So I'll create this document and I'll paste this, okay? And I think I have to render transparency. I think I have to render transparency as like a render. So I'm just gonna make sure that, let's see. Oh, sorry. I'm just gonna make sure that this is going to the right folder, not desktop. Maybe here, shots. Okay. Oh, that's for video though. Shots, there we go. And let's just go ahead and render viewport. Okay, there's a lot to polish. Like, for example, the window isn't perfect, but I'm sure like you could get this. Okay, I think I could copy this. All right, so now I have two renders. I have my transparent and my non-transparent. I'm just gonna make sure that they match properly. So yeah, 1 pixel up, sorry, down, there we go. So we're matching. And now I could play with the background here, just maybe add some levels, darken that quite a bit. And then get some sort of gradient. Maybe, let's see. I'm not a pro at Affinity just yet, but I'm gonna guess we're gonna create this sort of like pixel layer, a gradient. Opa, sorry. Yeah, fill tool. What? Okay. I'll just do a pixel layer. I'll create this orange. Not sure why that's happening. Because I should not be on. I'll try to do a solid color. Can I do that? Is that a thing? I mean, it should be. You know, I'll just I'll just use the fact that it's changed. Okay. Of course, didn't pick the color. All right, and then I'll do a mask for this and try to bring some of that orange from the bottom. Maybe let's do multiply and bring the opacity down. I think this needs some blur. So I'll just go ahead and hide my object and render viewport to clipboard just to get the background. Okay. Now let's place it right there. Okay. And now I can do some Gaussian blur maybe. That should be here. Gaussian blur. Oh, that's awesome. It does not work. I mean, I could do it here with blurring the background and so on. But the idea is that if you wanted to, you could. It would be simple to create a setup in which you have a couple of different layers doing what you need. So again, maybe darker, just a little bit of a gradient going on. Could be nice and effective. And it is not as boring as just a plain black background, which is what we've had for a bit over here. I mean, this looks nice. Maybe a little bright on the top for like related to the amount of light that we're getting from everywhere else. I'm feeling like these lights here, the reflections maybe look a little strong. Oh, and of course, we're not lighting the inside of this whatsoever. And I feel like it's a very important thing to light. So I would probably duplicate here and say inside lights inside, and then just let's do a sphere, less diameter, more brightness, more angle, and from the back we're going to try to get a little bit of light. Let's see, into this rangefinder. It's not easy. We might need to rotate, we might need to hide some parts. Okay, I don't think I have this. Yeah, so I probably need to do this on the glass. Yeah, that's probably really dark on the black mat also. I can see a little bit of the light coming through. I should be seeing more in any case. So metallic could be playing a part in how opaque this feels. Not not terribly bad. I think probably light direction is also doing, it's not doing enough right now. There we go. So I can get inside and pull the brightness down so that I'm just lighting the part that I need. Maybe something like that. That looks cool. That actually looks really, really cool. And I have the kind of like the itch of the lever. Like I don't I feel like I haven't explored this enough. But again, this might be the temptation of like getting some detail over there because it might be feeling a little, just a tiny bit too dark. And also the limitations of geometry. If this was modeled like the chamfer here was modeled, probably I would be having an easier time at getting the rim to show. That's unfortunately baked. So I'm going to guess that Marmoset doesn't really want to highlight this edge since it's already not looking at the camera. It's not the first time I've had this issue. I can try with the light handler. But no, it's a little bit too, yeah, too weird. Let's do more diameter. Nope, this is going. Again, probably playing a little bit too much with the idea of this being dark. All right, something I do at the very end, make sure that every light is playing its part. Okay, that's on. So that light is doing absolutely nothing. So let's make sure it is. Okay. So that's creating the red rangefinder. And now that I have the inside part here, I might want to play with this, make it a little bit colder, maybe something like that. Okay, that's the big window reflector. Again, not doing much. So there's way too much color. The strength is on 1. I'm a donkey. That's too much. If I want more color, I can use temperature. But I should be able to control that, not the material controlling me or the results. Okay. That's the shutter reflector, the rim light at the bottom, the fill light, and the rim light from the back. This might be the answer to... This might be the answer, but no, because I've tried all angles and it just purely doesn't work. So, yeah. All right. Only thing now is probably this here has like a reflection that is too big. Man, the wind is crazy strong. So let's maybe neutralize it, but have it really soft so that it's somewhat visible, something like this. And I think, yeah, it's a nice gimmick to have like the double line, but maybe again, like it's a little bit too cartoonish. But I think that's a good place to call that one done. So I'll save render viewport to clipboard, and I'll attempt a second render just to give you another example of a way that could be improving this. Okay, the before and after, it's very subtle changes, but as you can see, like making sure that every light is playing its part really brought in nicer depth to some areas. Okay, so little polishing is nice. I mean, now that I'm looking at it, it could be the temptation of making things like to never be dark, but I think we could also play a little bit with this area over here, the lens area, or the lens hood, lens cap, sorry, or mount cap area, whatever. If you want to be a geek like I am being, but I'm not sure that's adding a lot really. It's 2.1 on the sharpness. And this is reflector shutter. I mean, one, but we're gonna call this cap. So maybe just lighting this cap a little bit. Kind of carefully like that. Or maybe, again, like, let's not lose the directionality on the render. Maybe from the bottom right here. And like with a bit more of a gradient. I don't know. What are we doing? Are we really lighting? Are we really improving? Or are we just fighting the urge of not having any dark areas? Because again, this thing looks good. So what if I want to showcase my model a bit better? So I think a really good way to do that is with like a long texture. So I hope I'm forgiven for this, but today my student showcased let's see if I can just find. Today my student Miguel published a piece that we did on a mentorship together, and one of the renders is this one. And I really like to do this thing to kind of showcase the like different parts of the object in pretty much one shot. Like as you can see, it is very effective at like constructing an image that doesn't um that doesn't feel boring. Okay, like if we scroll down, it feels like there's always interest to look at. Miguel isn't here, right? Because he posted the whole image. Ay, 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 Miguel, I'm gonna let him know. All right. He should be notified about this. Hey, hey. Oh, so render house. To me, it looks realistic. I mean, how do you judge that it's stylized a bit? I like how like how to develop that eagle eye. I am talking about your render, my render. Yeah. Um, like, I mean, look, I think I might be going on like a on a tangent here, but I feel like the industry is a little bit too much like social medialized. What I mean by that is like we follow trends and like there is like very little personal touches anymore on like art, right? So how do you develop that eagle eye? Like eagle eye towards what? Towards detecting like a trend or the trendy sort of like white background render. Like if you're following me, what I'm trying to say is that you should be able to detect this if something looks good to you. I said I mean, okay, you said as you said it's stylized, but to me it looks realistic. You say I get it. I mean, I get it. I mean, this probably is more of a miscommunication. Do you mean this sort of what I meant with stylized is this sort of like reflection? But let me finish that because like I feel like again what you need to develop is this sort of like, does this look good to me? Is this following the style and the vision? Because one of the most important things that you need to do as an artist is develop your vision. If you're able to successfully take something that is coming from your imagination or from like a concept that you made or something similar to that, you're able to translate this successfully to a 3D art piece, like the finalized piece, then that's that's what matters. So eagle eye towards detecting stylized or you know the eagle eye is more of what's happening here. So I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, okay, that's too dark, right? So I have this sort of eagle eye towards something's too dark that that it looks wrong. Like if we look at my render, is this too dark that it looks wrong? No, because it feels intentional, right? Is this too dark that it feels wrong? Yes, because everything is lit, very well lit, and then all of a sudden it isn't. And we talked about this on the feedback. That's why I notified it. I know this is an older render. We already fixed this. So it's just that, like a little issue that we already caught on and fixed. But this is what you should develop, and every artist should develop that the eagle eye towards things like those. And if you haven't, just you should take a look at this. It's a hilarious animation that he did. I came all out of his imagination, and I love it. It made me laugh a few times while he was sending me the updates on it. It feels like a team for not team fortress, but like a Gary's mod type of animation. Anyways, that's more like the eagle eye. It's trying like, am I doing am I am I doing my vision correctly? Am I bringing it to life correctly? And look at things multiple times. Like if I have one advice that to develop sort of like the eagle eye is to take notes. So I'm doing this off the top of my head right now. But if I were to take notes on this, like what I just did is a good example. So let me render this to clipboard and let's bring this over to Excalidraw. File is too big. Okay, I'll do it over here. I'm not sure this has finalized the render. There we go. Okay, so I look at this and I look at this. Well, the composition it was off maybe, and now it's a little better. But I look at this and I'm thinking, okay, it looks good, but this looks better. Why does it look better? Because I was lacking a little bit of detail, maybe on some of the important areas. So with bringing a little bit more light, I'm able to bring contrast to these parts. So as you can see now, you can clearly read the numbers, while as before I wasn't. And I was already like it was like a fly on my ear, buzzing, bzzz, like you're not happy with that part. And I was trying to bring the rim light because I knew there was something there that I didn't like. So let's do something here. This is this is kind of cheating a little bit, but in photography I do this a lot, and I bring two versions of a photo, and then I blend a little bit, and I mean like for lighting specifically. Like I do a lot of gradients. So if for example I like this, but I want something in between, I'll just, let's see, that should be super soft. Like just bring the light to those areas a little bit. And that's nice post processing. That's fine. Like this is done all the time. Maybe not in games so much, but if you're like, are you an expert lighting artist? And answer is usually no. If you're a props artist, you're a props artist. And what do you want to do? You want to showcase your props the best that you can. So I'm sure like if you work on a team and you have an expert lighting artist next to you, um, you're gonna be able to ask them, how can I do this so that it behaves, it works in real time, right? And they're probably gonna be able, or you can spend a lot of time to figure it out. But if what you're looking for is an image, what you want is realism. What you want is like it looks realistic. Okay, let's do purely black and white. So we're painting gray. So again, I do this a lot in photography. I take I take my image, I post process it, and then I blend between the original or one version of the post process and another version of the post process. This works especially well in black and white. Like you get some like pretty much is like light like dark room printing, but maybe I'm going into a rabbit hole right there. So this you're bringing more light maybe to some areas that might need it. Like for example right there. And I'm trying to preserve the gradient as much as possible. But as you can see, I'm bringing in some of that light that I was missing on that part. And maybe I'm keeping these areas dark so that the rim light still behaves. To be honest, I don't even need to do this, but maybe a little touch of darkness towards the front works. Like as you can see here, just a little bit of maybe masking out this bright part right there. Let me start it over. So right there, for example, I might not want that touch of light. How could I do that? I could maybe use some sort of shadow blocker or shadow catcher, reflection blocker. I could just add a plane right here and make sure that this is blocked. This part of the reflection is blocked. So you could play with something and like if you wanted to do this in real life, right? But post processing is really good. Yeah, I agree with you, Slaven. And it unlocks new tools, new possibilities. As long as it's of course not overdone, it can be a really good way to bring like a different feeling. As you can see right there, we're doing a bit better than here, right? It's hold on. Yeah, but we had let's see this before. Let me show you the before and after. And this is like if again you do this with intention, you're not cheating so much as you're just speeding up the process. Because like setting up that shadow blocker or that sorry, reflection blocker is going to be a pain in the ass. But as you can see, like it's quite a nice way to bring a little bit more light to the important areas. Okay, so as I was saying, um, a really nice way to bring a bit more interest to your piece is by doing one of these longer renders. So maybe we could get the camera laid out like this. And the width of this render is going to depend on the width of the object. Like I don't want to do this. I want some negative space. If you pay attention here, that negative space is also bringing in the focus. Oh my, this wind, dude, like it's insane. Dude, I feel like the some trees is gonna fall on the house or something. You really cannot hear that? I hope it's also not in the recording because it's gonna be an annoying recording to watch. But anyways, this sort of like empty space also brings your attention because right now we have something like this. Let's see. Something like that. And what your eyes are doing is they're bringing attention towards the center in all of these directions, right? So that is happening right now. It's more, my attention is more here and it's kind of like sliding down towards the bottom, like through here and then through the orange part. Then if I look at the thumbnail, same thing. I'm starting here and then going down like so. So we kind of have like this flow. One, two. Oh my God, why is it? Why aren't these working? This always worked. Okay, that's working now. But it's not working now. Anyways, whatever. Like it's going in that direction. Programs. Today's not the day. Like I'm encountering every issue that I can. It's insane. Anyways, let's get that project going. So I'm going to go and save as, and I'm going to do, let's do final render long. So this is the long render. We can keep our original lighting, but the important part here is that, whoa, okay. See, by doing that, like you can take more notes. So what's drawing my attention now? This sort of line over here. This feels interesting. What if we could highlight it more on the render? Like right now, it's like flat and that line isn't, it's like it's not happening. So maybe like if I could do like a round of self-feedback, I would say, hey, that line could add some interest to your object. But anyways, more for, that's more for the thought for the future. Let's figure out a render for the long axis. So in this case, I'm going to start with 1920 by 1080, or sorry, 1080 by 1920. So I have a longer render. Good job me at like undoing for every step of the way and messing up the scene. Okay. Right. My transform's all messed up. Let's see. Zero it out. 0, 0, 0. Okay. So my camera is right there, and I'll make sure to rotate it 90 degrees. And as I said, the width of this render is going to be dictated by the position of the camera. So if I want something like that, the front and then the side, this is going to be a very thin render. So what about 14? Yeah, something like this. That should be a lot better. So maybe I can do something like this and then duplicate the object, rotate it, and rotate it towards the back, and then just move it down. Okay, it's not bad, but I feel like we have to care for the margins. So if I have 1 centimeter here, I'll have 1 centimeter here, 1 centimeter here, 1 centimeter here, and 1 centimeter here. So let's see. What about... So, I mean, an easy way to do this would be to render your object, render viewport to clipboard. I'm going to be creating this in the meantime. So that is that by 1920. Okay. I'm not sure why it's pasting off center, but then I could crop using affinity. Let's do something like that, and I can just read what this is. So that's 1414 by 1775. There we go. And now we should be having a nice amount of space there and there. Does that composition work? First question. I'm not sure. Let's do 150 degrees. Make sure that this is fully flat. So that's a decent way to see all the details top to down. So maybe for a render like a project like this, I would have a render that looks like that from the front, maybe another one that lights similarly from the back, and then some sort of like layout of the object, kind of like this. So this needs to be rendered, sorry, lit. I mean, it's quite easy to light this with something like Studio Tomoko, because that does like that already looks decent. Like it's very decently explaining or showcasing what we're doing with this object. Like I could maybe play with this a bit more, maybe rotate them a tiny bit more. Let's play with it. Yeah, see something like that. Maybe more parallel lines. But I feel like the important part here is to see. Okay, can I undo? I feel like, what the hell? No, I cannot undo. You cannot. It is forbidden to undo. So let's just figure it out. And do a lot of crazy stuff. It's fine to appear stupid, like you can't control your program. That's how happy accidents happen. Have happy accidents. Like maybe you find that like for a fraction of a frame your composition worked really well. Like if that happens, it's a lucky thing, you know? You might want to use that. But see, this works. Maybe I can get them together a bit more. I can also crop later. I don't have to be like worrying about pixels so early. I can crop again, I can crop later, that's fine. Let's do 1600. You can do a square composition and that's that. And again, leave room for happy accidents. So what's looking good about this? I don't think much. So what if we switch up our composition? Maybe a little bit of a rotation here and we start with the top area there and move that like so, and just maybe showcase the bottom a little. That's decent. An object casting shadows on another object could be a good thing or it could be a bad thing depending on how you light it. So I wouldn't discard this right away. Also, I remember having a height map there for the bottom of the camera. If you give me a second, let's see. Most likely, let's get the height. Yeah. Come on, you can do it, Google. You can do it. The height is already exported. So what's going on? Why didn't it catch? I guess, okay. Sorry, exports and then height. Okay, so that parallax should bring a little bit more volume into these parts. These are not modeled, they're baked. Okay. And then I feel like my ambient occlusion is also not doing anything. So when that happens, I'll just go ahead and, hold on. I'll just go ahead and apply that to the cavity map. So ORM, I'll make sure that this is on red. And now the cavity map is taking the ambient occlusion, so I can force that ambient occlusion slightly, as you can see. Okay, and I can start to bring a little bit more shadows into these parts. So that's a little trick. You put it onto the cavity map and it's kind of like a super boosted version of the ambient occlusion. I feel like the ambient occlusion wasn't doing enough right there. Okay, so how's this? I feel like one of the cameras is a little bit more rotated than the other. So yeah, that's flat, one against the other. It's a little bit of a Nintendo Switch type of, like, you know, that what they do with their controllers. But I feel like it's a start. Let's go to the camera and I'm gonna go for 1500 millimeters. See if I can completely flatten the top and the bottom of this. There we go. I like doing that, like matching the lines, the top and the bottom. It's not perfect. Like I could go maybe go for like a 3000. At this point, we have like no perspective whatsoever. So it's not the look for everyone, but I feel like it looks nice. So we could grab the sky and maybe now bring the brightness down and just once again play with what we have here. So from the camera, Control L, start with a light. We are super far away because it's a 300 millimeter. So I'll just, let's see, what is it here? Is anything lighting? Well, we'll just start fresh. So group, we have the other scene saved anyways. Okay, and this light one, well, for now, let's do this, bring the brightness up. Yeah, it's just really far away. Okay. So let's do more angle on the spot. That's crazy bright. So pretty much I have like two objects and I can maybe start treating them like one. So maybe that. And again, if I were to do like a 3 second or 5 second masterclass on lighting, like the first word I would use is gradients. At least for props. But everything works very well with gradients. So just a moment. Well, anyways, so gradients again. And I want to create one right here. So I'll do more of a top-down lighting. And once again, we're creating a similar look. Top feels bright, bottom doesn't. I don't know if this is going to look great, but it's a start for experimenting. What I know 100% is this will not have any sort of like depth of field. Okay, so where's my interest now? In if I start looking here, where's my interest? So I feel like maybe I could play with a little bit of a switch up. So what if I have top gradient from here on light one, and then for the second camera, I create some sort of like bottom gradient. So this is the left top, and I'll do right bot. Like I might be killing two birds with one stone by creating. Yes, that could be nice. So I could be lighting also the bottom area, so creating pretty much like a fill light of sorts. Okay, how's that? Okay, I must be careful because again, one light is like hitting the other object. In this case, it's a good thing. In this case, it's not a good thing. So it's not a terrible thing in any case, but it's not so good. Okay, that's decent. But I would say now it's time to do that rimming that we were talking about on the previous one. So let's do rim L for left, and I'll put this. I'll try to bring this light from the side over here. This is absolutely insane. And where do I want the gradient? Can I maybe play a little bit with contrasting gradients, or like these gradients fighting against each other a little bit? There is a ton of noise in this render. So I feel like this rim right here looks very nice, but it is bringing shadows to this. So again, I don't have I don't have to render both in the same image. I could do one first and then composite with the other. Now, there is ways to solve this anyways. Again, I'm going to try the plane thing. So if I go ahead and create a library objects plane. Okay, we have our plane. I'll go into camera 1 and I'm just going to rotate this 90 degrees and try to put it in between the two objects, kind of like this. Let's see if I rotate it 180 degrees. So what happens is it has an emissive. So of course it's doing that. But look now, I have separated both, right? Without the plane, like one render is hitting the other. Or one lighting is hitting the other camera, and I don't want that. So I could just place that plane, and you can see like it's not visible, and it blocks the light very efficiently or effectively. So I'm going to leave this plane over here, and I'm going to go back and play with my lights. So this right bottom now, I have a lot more freedom with it. I'm gonna make sure I use it, and I have a lot more freedom also with the rim. And this is what I wanted. I wanted to create a rim. If I wanted to fill, I would call it fill. But my intention was to create a rim light. So just because I had a nice, happy accident, I shouldn't lose my vision. And this is also one of the things that we were talking about before with you, Render House. Like eagle eye, it's a lot more important to understand your vision and to not like get distracted so much by, oh, this looks cool, and then I forget to do what I wanted to do. So I'll have this rim right there, and I'll create another rim or a fill light over here, because I might want to create a fill for that part. So maybe something like this, and we're gonna call this fill left, and then one more that I'll duplicate, and I want to light the inside of this thing. So I'll do a very small angle for the spot. Okay. And maybe bring up the diameter of the light. So just to bring in more lighting, let's see, on that part. It's bringing in a little bit too much light to the front. So sorry, to the top. So let's bring the, what's this, fill? Well, I'll rename it in a moment, but I just want to maybe get it inside of this circle. All right, there we go. Maybe again more diameter, maybe not more angle. I mean, maybe a bit more, but yeah, somewhat something like this. And again, we have the same bug in which the light will not show. Why is this so noisy all of a sudden? What has changed? So is my denoiser they removed an option that I really liked, which was the GPU CPU denoiser. But anyways, let's not lose focus. It's easy to get lost on so many movement, so much movement, and so on. So this is gonna be my shutter light. Okay. And I feel like this is really flat now. We're lighting the side and the top with the same intensity. Not a great thing to do. So creating something like this is a great way to break that flatness. Or again, just enough light. Or again, maybe we don't want to light from the center, we maybe want to light from the bottom. Let's create a nice amount of just light. I don't want reflection. It's really bothering me, the amount of noise that I'm getting in this render now for like no reason really. I'm gonna guess it's because my camera is really far away from the object because I have like a 3000 millimeter lens. This should clean up. But of course it is being really slow. So I guess something to consider when you're doing these renders. It cleans up nicely though on the final render, which is what matters. So I can get a nice and quick idea of what I'm doing. Oh, that recalculated now. I turned ray tracing off and on, and it fixed itself. So seems like a bug to me. Okay. Cool. What else? I mean, simple stuff really. Let's see. Cool. Very cool. So let's bring a little bit of the same action that I was doing before, Let's bring this sort of maybe like right bot and create our bottom lighting for this part. Make sure it's not hitting any of the other side. So we need to move it past the plane. I'll rename it in a moment. So again, past the plane and then like rim lighting. Okay, weird. Let's do something like this, maybe a bit of a smaller diameter. And again, we can play with temperature all we want to create like a, I think, a little bit more of a cohesive look with what we have already. One thing that's happening is that our white plane here, this white plane is probably bouncing a little bit too much light. If I make it black, it doesn't. Okay, look at the difference. If I make it red, it'll bounce red light. Important to get your reflectors to either, like if you're doing a light blocker, you don't want it to be white, you want it to be black. So now we can actually do this with a bit more control. Maybe something like that. I'm not 100% sure that this is what I want. But it's definitely a decent way to bring that cohesion from like with the render that we had before. Maybe it just doesn't need to be so strong. And let's try to do the same. So this is right bot. So this is left bot. Or pretty much like bottom rim. And let's duplicate this bottom rim and try to get it to hit this top part right here. And this is bouncing off of the plane once again. Could be due to the roughness. So I'll pull the roughness up because this is creating, most likely it's creating like a shiny reflection. Let's pull the roughness up and that should be out. And once again, like this is going to be the top rim and I could just place it where it's going to affect the right area, maybe somewhere like that. And like so. My bottom light isn't placed as nicely as the top one. So let's just name this. So this is my top rim. Okay, and I'm looking at the right bottom. Most likely right bottom is just a thing of like the spot angle. So I can just play with this and maybe create a sharpness of 0.1. A sharpness of 0.1 will still light most of the object, but it will create a much more subtle gradient. I'm not sure if this render is as interesting as the other one. But hey, I mean, it's a nice way to showcase what we're doing. Now we have a lot of really interesting details right here we're not using. So I'm going to duplicate left top or whatever light, and I'm going to try to light these parts here, the broken parts. Now my plane is in the way. It's time to disable shadows. So if I disable my shadows, you can see these details a lot better. Okay, it's important to use shadows intentionally, not just because a light casts shadows or not is more or less realistic. If we want a reflection from this, then we don't want the shadows, we want the reflection. So let's just use what we need. If I bring up the diameter, I should be able, let's see, to light more of it. Okay. Let's get the spot angle down. I'll duplicate this a couple of times and see what I'm sacrificing. Okay, so there's maybe a little too much information up there. So I'm going to try to do this with one light if I'm able to. And this is another example of something that we could do with post-processing. Like if I don't want lighting here, I'll just do two renders or three or however many I need. So I could render here. I could do my like window. I mean, I call this area the window. Maybe it's not a window, but I can render the viewport to clipboard. I'll take another like maximum 18 minutes to get this done. Not because I will consider it done by then, but because I feel like all the concepts are being clearly explained. And what we're doing now is probably just going around in circles. If you guys have any questions, that's why I'm not just recording this alone in the living room of my house. Uh, please feel free to ask anything. But anyways, like what I can do here is I can just remove what I don't need. So if I wanted that to be lit, I can just go in and paint these reflections in again with post and then remove from where I don't want them. Same thing if I wanted to maybe highlight some part there or some part there. One of those things, one of these things that I like about rendering still images is that it's the flexibility. Like, and you have to understand your intention because I myself, if I see this in a tutorial, I'm going to think this guy is cheating. But you have to be very honest with yourself. Like, what is your intention here? Is your intention to create a render that showcases your texture, or is your intention to create a render that showcases your rendering and lighting skills? Okay. When you're a props artist, most of the time you will, like 99.99% of your time will not be spent rendering something. And I could add nines to that 0.99%. So almost never, maybe once or twice in your career, you're going to have to light something in order for it to be like used in real time without like any trickery, right? So maybe if you're the guy lighting stuff like at Resident Evil, or the Resident Evil sort of like asset viewer, sure. But most likely that's going to be someone that's going to be a lighting artist or somebody whose job is to do this, right? But you're doing this for a portfolio. So if your intention is to get a shot that works, why are you going to be spending all that time into making it work in a non-cheating way? Which isn't, again, it's not cheating. It's just using your tools efficiently. So just because you did it without any trickery, that it's not going to make things look better. It at most, it's probably gonna make things look worse. It's this sort of like being stuck into everything being as like simulated and realistic as possible that like kind of clamps us artists into not doing the best work that we can. Like games has always been about smoke and mirrors. So if you can take that approach and use it on your renders, do it. I'm not doing a concept art. I'm not adding details that weren't there. That is like, for me, that's kind of the line. Like, for example, if I say, oh, it would look cool if now I kind of like, I don't know, do some AI generate some detail here. That's probably crossing a line. But like taking a light, painting it there, and blending the two, I don't think that's nothing to be crucified about. So Yeah, if we keep pushing this, I think at some, like, eventually we're gonna get to a very nice place. I'm going to be I'm going to be detailing this shot a lot more, and then I would apply because we have a plane in the center, which again is doesn't necessarily need to be there. Like we could render this shot first, and then render this shot first, like second, and then just paste them together. But if you really want to do them at once because it's easier for you to see the composition, which is the only reason why I'm doing this, then my plane is already helping me to divide the two renders. So again, you can do a lot of stuff to make this work as best as you can. So let's see. So let's do something like that, and then let's duplicate this, and let's bring a little bit of light to this side, maybe a little bit more angle and less brightness. And again, now we have a really nice amount of interesting details. Like if you wanted to render this and blend, that would give you a nice tool once again to simulate or to bring your ideas to life a bit more efficiently. That's probably more of concepting that than I would have wanted or I would have liked. So I also draw the line at gradients. So let me go once again. So I most of the time I draw the line at gradients also. And if I need to paint something, then I will. But if you can do a gradient like that, this is again, you can simulate this by adding a plane and having a soft enough light that does this, and this is also a really effective way of bringing a little bit more light to the area that you wanted, which I'm sure if I played with the settings enough, maybe with the angle, maybe with the position of the light, maybe with the diameter, and maybe again with adding some sort of plane to catch shadows, I could get a very similar effect. Very similar. But if you're not comfortable with lighting, but you have a vision, this is a really good way to go about these things. And stuff like that is also very well justified. Why? Because you don't have the tools to create a custom shader that does this with glass. I mean, if you know shader programming in Marmoset, go ahead and code it, you know? But most of us don't have this knowledge. If I were using Unreal, probably I could do this with nodes. But if you have a vision for the way your glass should look like, then you can also use these tricks. Because I think a lot of us forget that when we're artists, what we want to create is art, and a render could be like explaining the vision that we have for our materials. It's just that maybe I don't want to spend like 3 weeks learning like high level shading language, or I don't know if that's the one. What's the one that Marmoset uses? Is it is it that one? Yeah. I mean, custom shader language, which is a mix of two. Okay, so now I have to learn GL and so on. Yeah. So maybe I don't want to do that. And I can just portray my vision with a little brushstroke, which is effective and a way and again, it's your vision. You're not altering something so much that it's not, let's say, doable, or you wouldn't be able to do it from like an artistic perspective. Maybe a technical part is like getting in the way. But anyways, I think the idea is clear. So yeah, And then of course, like moving on and moving on, eventually you'll be able to get a render that that you're happy with. I think I have to pause it here because I've been here for a long time already. I'm not sure how long this is already. Almost 2 hours long. Um, Mostly the same things that we've been talking about. Detailing the glass, maybe balancing out some lights and shadows, and creating an interesting rim setup, like maybe from the bottom and so on. And eventually you'll like we're landing in a very similar tone for both these renders. I would like to see this one completed, but unfortunately time is limited. And when you visualize this in on ArtStation, it's great because you can do like this sort of scrolling and sort of allows for some room to analyze the textures and so on. So this would be 100% roughly, and this would be kind of like the size of my render. So if I light it properly, I should be able to see a lot of the details that I have. Maybe it would be a good thing if I went in and reduced the opacity of a few. I feel like there's maybe a lot going on with some of these scratches, but I feel like the idea is there. All right. So I'm gonna stop it there. Do we have any questions before I close the recording and this stuff? I'm gonna guess not. Cool. All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I mean, it looks nice. I think there's a lot of room for improvement. Most likely, like the result that I'm happy with is this. I think it's a little bit more polished. This is more of like let's bring those concepts into some other arrangement. But in order to get something that feels as polished, like we would have to spend a little bit more time. Like most likely the ratio is like we spent about an hour on this one, and then with this one we didn't stand a long like we didn't spend a long time like progressing, more like explaining little things. But yeah, okay. Well then, thank you for being here. I think this is going to conclude the series unless I have some interesting questions on like the Discord server or the YouTube comments. I think this should take you to a place in which you understand what you're doing when it comes to lighting and somewhat presentation. Although I think I know I can get a lot more from a presentation class. I really wanted to bring this into Marmoset and see some final result. Um, but yeah, thanks for being here. I hope you enjoyed this series, and I'll make sure to bring something interesting for the next one. All right. Have a good one and speak soon. Bye bye.